My name is Annika and this is my presentation on how to use Figma Smart Animate to bring prototypes to life. I chose this topic as I think it is something that will be very useful to communicate between designers and developers to get the desired effect for a finished product or solution. I've also found this harder to work with, specifically Figma Smart Animate, and actually bringing the design to life. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to dive into it more into depth. So what is Figma Smart Animate? It is a new feature in Figma which allows the designer to implement smart animations which can be easily translated into code. It uses matching layers that exist on multiple frames and recognizes the difference and then animates the layers in between the frames. It is found in the actual transition list when in prototype mode. So you can see here when you go into prototype mode, you usually get the interaction detail when you actually link the frames, and then beforehand you'd have on click navigate to frame 1 and then you could choose, for example, instant or dissolve, whereas now, or for the past 2 years, we've had the smart animate option. This gives you the option to have a much better control over the animation. For example, you can choose a lot of different options on this drop down menu, like ease in, ease out, drag, a lot of different, or actually not drag, sorry, like linear, custom. It's more on this on click where you can do drag and so on. And then you can also choose the actual timing and have a better control over that. So then animation control, as mentioned, was one of the key aspects that they wanted to focus on when creating this. It focuses on 5 main aspects of the animation, which is scale, rotation, position, opacity, and fill. So I use this slide created on Figma to give a demonstration of this, a very basic demonstration on how you could use it. So for instance, scale, when you hover over this, the scale increases. Then when you click, it rotates, and then when you go off, it goes back to its normal state. So just these 2 very simple animations are done by creating 3 different layers that are all the same, but changing aspects of it, and then creating the smart animation between them to for example, on this aspect, the animation is ease in and out back, so that means that it has this kind of bounce effect. Then the opacity, for instance, when hovering over this, the opacity changes. That's also a new frame. And then when clicking, the fill and the color changes. Then we go on to layers and naming. So as mentioned, this program was, or this aspect of the program was built on looking for matching layers that exist across the multiple frames. The name of these layers have to be taken into consideration. So on some parts they have to be the same, for example, to create the seamless sort of smart animate. And also components, if they're the same on the different on the same slide, for example, but they're changing, they have to be the same name for it to work. It also takes into account the hierarchy, so where they are in the frames, and it also has learned, or they've made it recognize what's changed and then apply the transition to animate between them. So components. So something that I found out very quickly when trying to learn how to use this was components, and having components ready is essential. I found that going into it without these ready and going into the animation halfway through was extremely difficult, as you'd need to go back and forth and delete animations, and since there are so many links, it gets very, very confusing. So what I found was having a component ready and in the asset list under local components makes the process so much easier. For instance, with the drag animation or pulling to refresh, this is essential. So an example that I learned was, for instance, if you have an email browser that you're trying to design, often on the email list there will be the option to sort of drag to delete an email, especially on a phone view. So this would be a great example to have the drag animation. So in this case you would have the frame, the initial frame, and then you would have the component, which would be, for example, a red delete bar that would slide over. You'd have that off to the side, so on the same frame but out of view. And then on the second frame that you would connect with the animate, you would have it covering. And then you could create a drag animation that could be slide in or whatever you prefer, and then this would show. You could also do this with pulling to refresh. So yeah, having these ready before animation is really necessary. And yeah, you would create the edited components, add them to the local component area, and then add them in when going on to animate. So I use this slide as well as an example of how you could use this. So here I have the component, which is the actual Figma logo PNG, and I added the drag animation. So it might just look like I'm dragging it back and forth across the page, which I am, but it's actually two separate slides, one where it's placed here, the other where it's placed here, and then having the drag animation between them. So yeah, I thought it would be a good idea to create an example of designing a website and adding some of these smart animates into it, so it's quite easy to see how it can be used to bring the prototype to life. So this is the website that I created. It's very simple, quite minimalistic, and the first thing I did, which I found that when coding websites, I always like to create some kind of animation, for example, on the logo, just to make it clear that you can, for example, click on it to get back to the home page, or just to make it clear that it is clickable. So for example, this one, I made it increase in the size. And then another thing I wanted to create was the hover effect, because this is used quite commonly as well. This was a very straightforward thing to do. You just create another frame, you change the position slightly of the button, so above or below, and then you create the smart animate that specifies that when hovering it, for example, ease in, ease out, and then yeah. And then the main thing that you need to consider in this, for example, is that when you create the second one, you create the animate between it, you have to create an animation back as well, so it returns back to its initial state when when the mouse leaves. So here you can see it's a very simple animation, yeah, where it just hovers up and down. Then another thing I wanted to create was a burger menu. So this is this thing here in the corner, so you can see that when you're hovering over it, it's clickable, and then what slides out is a burger menu. So here it's easier to visualize that this actual burger menu on frame 1, or the initial frame, is actually positioned on the outside, if that makes sense. So it's positions off the side, and because animation is quite slow, you can see that this one's coming in first, and that one, and that one, and that one. And that's because that in this slide 1, where I have them off to the side, or in the frame 1, they're positioned like this one's first, this one's slightly more to the right, and this one's more, and this one's more. And then in the actual frame that I'm creating the animation to, it's lined up like this. So I'm creating an in-between state basically in the initial frame, which allows for this to happen. Then with this actual burger menu, something that I found to be quite interesting was I had forgotten to name it the same in the two slides. So initially on this page here, it was called burger, this component, whereas on this page here, when it changes, this was called group 2 or something like that. And because of that, it had sort of an ease in and ease out effect, this actual burger menu here. So it wasn't a seamless sort of twist, if that makes sense. But when I changed it, it recognized that it was actually the same, and then creates this animation of this element. So going into it, I didn't think that this would be possible because they're different. They're different positions, but that is actually a key aspect of why this is so useful, because you can manipulate each piece. So yes, that is pretty much it on this quick sort of demonstration of how you can use it, and very easy to get started with it. And obviously you can create a lot of different things with this, and there's many opportunities that you can do with this. So yeah, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed it.